We do a lot of lab tests in healthcare, and we do them because they give critical information regarding a patient's condition. But in this world where we have more patients requiring care and clinicians that are overloaded, a lot of tests remain unacknowledged, which potentially leads to delayed diagnosis and treatment. How do we deal with this overwhelming tide of data without losing critical information in the process? Because if we do it well, we want to make sure that every test result finds its way back to the clinician and the patient and close that loop in patient care. With me today is Paul Deffley, Chief Medical Officer at Alcidion. And in this episode, we talk about the significant challenge of managing results in clinical practice and how technology can serve as a digital safety net, how we can go about prioritizing critical test results to streamline clinical workflows and governance, and measuring the success of digital health implementations and the broader implications for operational efficiencies and patient care across the global healthcare landscape. Collaboration starts with the conversation, Team HealthTech. Let's make it happen.
Welcome to Talking HealthTech, featuring content and community about technology and healthcare. We acknowledge the traditional owners of lands these conversations were recorded and pay respect to elders past and present.
So, Paul from Alcidion, thank you so much for joining me here on the Talking HealthTech podcast. And when I do these ones, we like to choose it at an equally inappropriate time, just because we're on either side of the world. So I appreciate you making the time to have a chat with me today.
Absolute pleasure, Pete. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here, and I would love to learn a little bit more about you and your background and what you do at Alcidion, because obviously Alcidion, us being here in Australia, know the organisation well and increasingly seeing a global presence. I can't wait to learn a little bit more about you and what you do with Alcidion.
Of course, yeah. So, introducing myself, I'm Paul Deffley. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Alcidion. By way of background, I 20 years practicing as an NHS clinician, so trained as a doctor, and continue to practice just about as a doctor, but spend the vast majority of my working week as Alcidion's Chief Medical Officer. My main sort of role around that is supporting product strategy, ensuring that what we design and ultimately deploy delivers benefits for the clinical teams that we're here to support. I cover the UK, Australia and New Zealand, so I've got a fabulous opportunity to meet a range of people working in healthcare settings.
Love it, Paul. Look, and this is going to be interesting because there's quite a few episodes in the back catalogue that talk a little bit more about Miya Precision and a bit about like what Alcidion does, and we'll link those up in the show notes for people to learn a little bit more from those episodes as well. But on this focus that you have from a clinical side around product, I have seen that product continues to expand and grow with Alcidion as well. Tell me a little bit more about this latest module that has come to surface with, is it Miya Results Tracking? Tell me a bit about it.
Absolutely, Miya Results Tracking. I mean, results in clinical practice are such a huge part of a clinician and a system user's daily life. Almost 95% of patient pathways in healthcare require a blood test of some sort. In England and Wales, we run over 1 billion tests every year, and the average person receives about 14 tests in a calendar year. So it's a really significant volume of activity and work. And also the complexity around how results are managed. There's not one consistent workflow, and obviously this takes place in a range of different settings. So we've worked really closely with clinical teams to understand how we make results safer, how we make doing the right thing to do the easiest thing to do, and how digital systems support clinicians to engage with results and manage them in a really timely and efficient way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As you allude to, though, results and diagnostics and tests and things, they're certainly not a new thing in the clinical life. So we're obviously managing them in some capacity now. Like what are some of those challenges that a new module or solution would address in something that's quite fundamental in all clinical life?
So, I mean, the challenges that we face with results relate to responding to them in a timely way, in an accurate way, or even responding to them at all. So when you look at academic evidence, when they've looked at clinical organisations, the results vary, but up to 60% of results in healthcare systems may not be formally acknowledged. That's not to say that they go unacted on, but there's not that final governance closure to say, yes, I, Paul Deffley, as a clinician, acknowledge this result and ensure that this has been enacted on. And in emergency department settings, that can be as high as 75%. So 3 out of 4 results go unacknowledged. There is a consistent challenge relating to delayed diagnosis and harm to patient care relating to results being responded to in a slow or inconsistent or broken workflow. So the problem we're trying to solve is really give clinicians the opportunity to manage those accurately. This is a multi-step process, and often failure at multiple steps leads to these harmless outcome that we're describing. And so creating a digital solution that means that we don't rely on the heroics of our clinical teams to get this right is what we've aimed to do.
I can only imagine, obviously, if I think about it, then these results or these information coming back, it's all data, right? And it needs to inform then the clinician in terms of the best pathway for the patient. And I can only think that would be a very large bottleneck, as we always talk about the increasing amount of data that we're producing in a clinical setting, the pressure that places on clinicians. And as you kind of allude to, a lot of tests that they would go unacknowledged, or there's just, it feels like if we can streamline anything in healthcare at the moment and try and win back some of that time for clinicians to deliver better patient care, then it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. By streamlining that process and creating these time savings for clinicians, you reduce cognitive burden and you give them the opportunity of also making good decisions when the results are in front of them. So having digital solutions that act as this sort of safety net that supports clinical practice, I think is a really important development that we need of systems. Ultimately, once we start getting all of this information in one place, we can then start applying clinical decision support and algorithms to support the filing process. But it's step one. Let's create a digital safety net. Let's understand the results, make sure that we have appropriate governance and activity around them, and then start enhancing the role that technology plays in result management.
Hey, I like that term that you just mentioned. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere else too, this concept of a digital safety net. What did you mean by that? Tell me a little bit more.
Let's take a result and just work that through and sort of describe sort of what this means. So if I'm admitted to an emergency department and I have a blood test done, I might move out of that department into the care of a clinical team. Those clinicians aren't aware that result has been requested, and sometimes there's a delay of several days, depending on the result, that they might come into before the result comes back from the lab. In that 2 or 3 days, that person might have gone through 2 or 3 different clinicians and ultimately being discharged home before the result is available. We have these single points of failure of decision making that if that result isn't enacted on, or the context of that request isn't understood, then the right activity doesn't take place. And so those clinicians, as that person moves through different teams, we separate out the context of the result and the person. We make it harder to make a right decision and ultimately harder to take accountability for that result. And so the digital safety net just means that we can connect the result to the person. We can give an opportunity to link it to the full EPR record to make decision-making accurate. And we make it easier for clinicians to take the right action. We don't have these single points in this process that make it hard to do the right thing.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I get the why and why this needs to be solved now too. So, got the good foundation there. I'm keen to understand a little bit more how the thing actually works, though. Like, so who's the user of this module? How does that kind of workflow operate? Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, Alcidion's background is around sort of integration, pulling information out of different systems, and so we have a provenance around pulling siloed information into one place. So with Miya Results Tracking, what we do is we integrate the information out of lab information systems, different parts of the medical ecosystem, and pull all the results into one place. We then filter and apply some logic to those results to understand urgency and understand results that haven't been acknowledged. So we filter out results that have had that formal governance step to, and then create a user interface to the user that create the list of unacknowledged results, associated importance, urgency, but we cut that in a range of different ways. So the user's actually quite a flexible concept with Miya Results Tracking. It could be a responsible clinician who has a team of clinicians underneath them to have that oversight of results. It can be used from peer-to-peer to manage annual leave and cover situations across a healthcare setting. But it can also be used for governance teams to understand, actually from a reporting perspective, how many results have we got that are unacknowledged? What's the longest amount of time a result's gone unacknowledged for? How many critical results have we got within our system? So the user actually varies depending on the use case. But the principles are we get all of the information into one place. We create a UI that allows you to sift and filter based on department, person, criticality, and really curate purposeful workflows for the clinicians to get the work done.
Yeah, cool. I think, as you were saying that too, I think you touched on these concept of prioritization, and my head was there for a little bit. But also, it sounds like, I think about, if I've got some complex tasks or a lot of data in front of me, if I can put it into a base, I'm a visual kind of guy, Paul. So if I can see it in a graph or a pie chart, all of a sudden there's new information to me. It's the same information I'm looking at, but in a different way. It sounds like there's a little bit of this visualization aspect that goes on with the tool as well.
100%, Pete. So there's different people perceive and interact with data in different ways, don't they? So we have list capabilities, but sometimes you just want a graphical widget that's just got a color on it that draws your eye. We drive a principle of low density views. So we try and make visuals the main mechanism of interaction with the solution, but there's textual fields there that support that. So within My Results Tracking, there's a red tile that says urgent, a critical result. And alongside the red, there's 3 dots to support colorblind users to make sure they get the same graphical nudge or alert to promote best practice. So we try our best to cater for a range of different mechanisms by which people interact with data, but you'll be pleased to hear that somebody with your graphical predilection will get a list that where your eye's drawn to and where effectively, where's my risk? Where do I need to take action? Where do I need to do something? Is there for you. And that's curated in a way that hopefully makes sense, irrespective of your preference for interaction.
Explain this complicated thing to me in pretty pictures, please. It's not quite there, but that's sometimes where my head goes. I was thinking as well when you're talking about the prioritization aspect, and especially this day and age when, for a clinician to utilize a tool and then to suggest to them, well, it's going to tell you which ones are the important ones and which aren't. Yeah. It's not an industry that is very accepting of any kind of black box technology. It's that's nice for the technology to suggest that to me, but I'd really like to understand how that decision's taken place, because in the end, as the clinician, I kind of take that ownership and responsibility, or whatever your role is within a healthcare setting. Yeah. Talk to me through a little bit more about some of that I guess how the intelligence or the prioritization or how the thing works behind the scenes, so that then you can still instill that trust within the end users that it's helping, not creating more kind of cognitive burden.
So the criticality of results is very straightforward logic. It's predefined metrics from the laboratory. At what point is a result abnormal? And at what point does that abnormal drift into such an extent that it's away from the normal range that it becomes a critical result? So we are fed that information that's predefined by the laboratories or local health systems where there's a little bit of variation, but largely speaking, that is how we prioritize the urgency. So that criticality, this concept of a range of criticality at the top, abnormal, and then normal results, that we surface that and give you a graphical nudge to that. And then that combined with a simple algorithm about time. So one would suppose that it is reasonable to think a result that's hung around the longest, that is critical, is the most timely thing for me to respond to at that point in time. Again, that's preconditioned filters, but we give clinicians the ability to move and manage the filtering of the data within the UI. So we don't force people into that type of interaction, but effectively it's a sift between duration and criticality that helps us structure and shift that. I think there's definitely onward work to look at algorithms that might suggest responses. So give you nudges as to, well, look, Paul, this person's anemic and they're on this medication. So actually, we think that the onward task and activity here is ABC. So there's a clinical decision support thing. Again, just give me that nudge, that promotion of what the right thing to do is. And ultimately, there is work that's going on around how do we manage the volume of results and start filing, acknowledging results that actually are within normal range and don't have a clinical activity, and sift those from others. So that's work in progress that is part of that automation theme that we're seeing. But I think it's a really good point, Pete, that at the moment, black box technology, from a clinical safety perspective, from a medical device regulation perspective, all of these have got quite some progress to be done on. And when we flip back, what's the problem we're trying to solve? We're talking about automation of results and clinical decision support. Up to 3 out of 4 results in an emergency setting is going unacknowledged at all without that formal step. So there is absolutely some really exciting progress that can be made in the future. But in the here and now, the reality is we need to plug this gap between the governance process, people's results, and making sure patients get a timely response to the investigation or procedure that they've had.
It's fundamental, isn't it? And as you were talking too, and I've been considering all of this through the lens of a single clinical facility, but I'm interested in terms of, those health settings with multiple locations that are interested in how they need to centrally manage, or even interested in benchmarking or comparing and all of that. Is there like this multi location capability as well?
Absolutely. So as part of the filters, we can look at multiple healthcare settings. So if this is an organisation that has 3 geographical sites where care is delivered, they may also have community teams that's engaging in care in people's homes. The tool's agnostic regards that. So we just need to understand the infrastructure, and we create a technical architecture that is sympathetic to that. And again, I'm a bit of a data geek and sort of love the thought of putting all the information in. And so you can start looking at variation and clinical variation. You can see that actually, if you're under the care of Dr. X, you're 8 times more likely to get a blood test than if you're under the care of Dr. Y. And it starts asking all these really interesting questions about sort of best practice, how do we promote the right thing? So whilst the initial problem we're solving is based on patient safety, supporting clinicians with smart tools, the opportunity beyond that is really significant.
Yeah. Hey, so this is a new module being rolled out, identified from a important need. What is, as the thing rolls out, what is success going to look like? What should we, if it does what it's supposed to do, then what are we going to see?
What we should see is a significant drop in the number of results that are going unacknowledged in that organisation's system. Right. So a really simple thing that we can measure, and it's really great because it's not a pseudo measure. It's not something that sort of implies an activity. What we're doing is we're recording and capturing. We know this is not best practice. We know this is associated with patient harm. So let's reduce that number down. So the ultimate is that we're reducing the number of results that go unacknowledged. And the second thing that we would like to see is the shortening of the gap in which results are responded to and acknowledged. It's a bit of an association, but what we want is the vast majority of results responded to in the most timely way possible. The sort of third thing that what good would look like is making sure it's not just about acknowledgement, but acknowledgement of a result is because as a clinician, I'm assured that this result has had the right activity associated with it. So say, for instance, an anemia blood result comes in. That person's likely to need iron studies, B12, and find out other things to help a clinician understand what do we need. Is this something we need to worry about, or is this just a bit of variation because of other health problems they've got? And in Miya Results Tracking, what you're able to do is also enact tasks and activities associated with results. So not only do we look at the gross number of results that are acknowledged, we look at them being acknowledged in a really timely way. We also want to make sure that the right activity is driven and takes place in the context of that result. Harder to measure because there's lots of context to every single result, and even a normal result can drive activity because it excludes something or rules a condition out, so it must be something else. But ultimately, success looks like more results acknowledged. They're acknowledged in a really timely way, and the appropriate tasks and activities where there's been a gap and where that hasn't happened in that episode of care, the clinician is able to use the digital tools to drive that task, drive that activity, to make sure that the quality of patient care is at the absolute highest it can be.
I'm trying to put the hat on of someone responsible for investing into technologies like this within a healthcare setting, and figuring out what kind of lens I'd be looking at it through. Because on one hand, there's this really important governance piece, which you've certainly outlined and made very clear, is that, you know, there's a lot of tests that might go missed, and that's a point around potential patient harm. Sometimes it can be difficult to you know, an investment into governance is important, but there's always like a bar that kind of needs to be met. And so what's important and what would be invested. But as you were talking too about activity and you know, with looking at a sound investment into the operations of a healthcare setting, I think any investment into something that would allow you to ensure activities don't go missed is probably a sensible one in itself. How do you think about this whole kind of, are we more in the governance camp or more in the kind of efficiency gain and operational improvement side, or is it a little bit of both?
I genuinely think there's a bit of both. And the rationale for that, I think the clinical safety elements and the governance piece is really clear, it's pretty unarguable. But from an operational perspective, if there's a delay in diagnosis, people present later with more severity, with more complications, there is an onward effect of how much activity that drives, but there's also a litigation aspect of the financial impact as well. So I think from an operational perspective, I think helping people present to health systems earlier in their condition, their disease, whatever it happens to be, ultimately allows an organisation to engage in a lower level of clinical care because you're treating that condition earlier. And also the onwards legal consequences of that delayed diagnosis is not insignificant. And it has been sustained for years, Pete. This has not improved in terms of cost to the healthcare system.
Yeah, no, that's pretty clear. Are we? Is this a global thing? Because you obviously saying know a lot about the UK and Alcidion is a global organisation. Are you finding it's one particular region, or this is systemic across all healthcare?
No. Absolutely. This is sustained across all of our health systems that we work in and in conversations that we see. And Miya Results Tracking actually originated in work in Australian sites. So whilst the framing around the data from the UK is present, this is a problem that is common across healthcare systems. In some ways, where there's not a universal health identifier, it actually is more problematic and more challenging because there's more broken episodes of care, and it's harder to string those data pieces together. So Miya Results actually has its provenance in Australian work that we've done with Australian sites.
Lastly, what can we look forward to seeing from? It's interesting hearing from your side from the clinical aspect. Looking at Alcidion, you're launching the new module. We understand a little bit more what success will look like. But what can we look forward to seeing from Alcidion over the next 6, 12, 24?
We're really excited. We're taking Miya Emergency, our new emergency module, live in 4 sites in the UK. And so that's taking place in the next sort of 3 to 4 months. And applying these principles that you've heard about Miya Precision and the real-time analytics and the integration points and these real clinical supportive workflows that we have. So that's going to be a real flagship moment for us. Really excited about that. We're just at that sort of tipping point of handing over the solution into a training and full deployment rollout. But that's going live in June. So that's really exciting. And also expanding our flow work that is taking place as well globally. So as we deploy more, we're starting to look at the evaluation that has been done We've had an Australian-based evaluation of the Flow solution that's shown a 13% reduction in length of stay across the whole organisation, which is fantastic data. But digital tools are obviously incredibly valuable, but the thing that we look for as an organisation to know the difference we're making is the benefits and unlocking those benefits, and to see tools deployed, matured, and unlocking that benefit is the absolute sort of pinnacle for us as an organisation. So we're really excited to learn more about that and share that learning and insights that we've been able to create.
Yeah, look, a few moving parts there, but I guess we're moving in that same direction in terms of improvement around workflow, delivering quality patient care and doing that with the most appropriate technologies. So look, Paul, I really appreciate making the time to have a chat on the podcast. We'll put the details for Alcidion in the show notes of this episode. And there's a good presence for Alcidion on the Talking HealthTech website. People can go back and check out previous episodes too. So, Paul, thanks so much for joining on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Talking HealthTech. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. For more information and resources about healthcare innovation, visit talkinghealthtech.com.